Hello, this is Chris Jantzen. Welcome to the End Evil podcast.
My name's Chris Jantzen. I'm here today with four other awesome gentlemen I've met. We formed a little group. We're the One Great Work Warriors. We've all studied the work of Mark Passio. We've all looked at various freedom activists over the years. We've all come to recognize that there are huge problems in the world with the way things are right now. And I've found these other four gentlemen have some really deep thoughts and a lot to share. And we're having a great discussion tonight about rights. And so we're going to have a little roundtable so you can see some different points of view and some different minds coming together on this issue of rights, on the subject of rights. And we're going to try to flesh that out for you and share with you our thoughts. So I personally just want to start off by saying that I've been shocked and dismayed in the last 2 years, especially how people do not seem to understand what a right is, or how important it is that we understand what a right is. And in the most simple way, what I try to talk about on the End Evil podcast is that a right is pretty much simply something that's not wrong. And that's a good starting point for what the word actually means. What is a right? But I'm going to go ahead and let Brandon Spencer speak next and introduce himself and hear what he has to say about this subject of rights.
Thank you, Chris. That was a fantastic intro. Howdy, everyone. Um, if you're not familiar with who I am, that's totally fine. I'm not anybody who is important. It is the knowledge and what we are discussing that holds the utmost health importance. So, what is a right? A right is an action or behavior that is in accordance with law. And I don't mean law as in lowercase LAW, a man-made law. I mean a natural law, the inherent, immutable, universal laws. So why is it in accordance with law? Because it does not initiate coercion or violence. And we are talking about behavior. We are talking about actions that are manifested with our hands. Rights are rights are universal. They are objective, meaning they do not waver, they do not change based on person to person, culture, race, what you identify as, um, how much money you have. All of that is irrelevant when it comes to rights. Rights are truly objective from a equal understanding in the form of actions and behaviors. And why is it called a right? Because it is something that adheres to the law, meaning it is something that is upright. Because the natural law is something that is immutable, meaning it can't be changed. So a right is something that adheres to that immutable, unchangeable law. So there is no such thing as time changing or delegating rights. There is no such thing as man delegating rights. Rights are something that are non-man made. We cannot create them. We cannot change them. So before I go any deeper, I'm going to pass it on to Jerry.
Thank you, Brandon. That was an amazing intro on what rights are. Thank you, Chris, for introducing us. So I'm Jerry. As Brandon said, that's not important. What's important are what rights are. I think it's important for us to hear from different people what rights mean. So maybe one of us can help you understand this better. So, as Chris mentioned, Mark Passio was the one who introduced rights to me last year. And when I understood what rights meant, as Brandon said, is not doing harm to others, it's the opposite of a wrong. I knew that came with responsibility, and now it's my duty to tell you what a right is, and I'll pass it on to Jim so he can introduce himself.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, I'm Jim. It says James on the screen, but everyone calls me Jim. Thank you, Chris and Brandon also. Yeah, I think probably the newest to this work, and I had discovered Mark Passio's work last year. And same thing as Jerry said, I had never really thought about what a right is. And then you go out in the world and you start asking people, thanks for changing my name. You go out in the world and you ask people what a right is, and they don't know. And so, like Chris said, people don't understand what a right is. And I started to get hung up on the actual word being misused. And so, like, when you say, like Brandon said, you can't give the rights away to people because they exist universally in nature. But of course, man believes that they have the right to make up laws that are actually wrongs. And so I get so hung up on that. Like, for example, there's, cases like we spoke about, Child Protective Services believe they have the right to take your child away. And for me, in a case where the parents have done no harm, but they believe they have the right to do that. And that's obviously a wrong, right? So it's like the word's been hijacked, and we've been taught to think that a wrong is a right. And I came across this quote by Thomas Paine in Common Sense. It says, "A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right." And I think I probably lived most of my life that way, and so have so many. I've just never thought about it. How just simple things. If a cop feels they have the right to give you a ticket, or just say not wearing a seatbelt or not having the correct sticker on your car, you're not harming anyone, but they have the right to steal your money from you. So that's my thing. I'm still working that out. As far as, obviously, when you hear the word right, you think it's the opposite of wrong, or it's correct. It's it's got many definitions, the opposite of left, but we're not going there. But what you know what I'm saying? I really get hung up on how the contradiction of how the word is used. So that's where I'm at with that. I'll pass it to Rick.
Thanks, Jim, and thank you guys. You guys are all amazing. I that's what I want to say, and you guys are breaking it down great. And definitely, I've been studying Mark Passio's work for a lot of years and learned so much, and what a right is. And I don't think a lot of people think about what a true right is. And over the last few years, I definitely did notice, and I think most people that are listening have noticed that if you know what a real right is, that we are losing them so quickly and so drastically. And that kind of put me out there I like to go and talk to people in person if I can. And I always seem to be asking people if they can tell me what the definition of a right is. And it's surprisingly, most people can't give you an accurate definition of what a right is. I hear people say that it's what the government says that it is. I hear a lot of different things. It comes from people of authority. They'll tell you what a right is, and we should follow what they say, not really having any true idea of what a right is. And then it kind of makes sense why we're losing our rights so quickly, is because how do people defend and protect something if they don't even know what they're protecting and can't even define what it truly is? And so when you look at it that way, you can kind of see why we're losing these rights. And I know where I live in Canada, they're taking more rights away when it comes to gun ownership, and nobody's fighting back, because I really don't think people realize the importance of what a right is. So I think it's great that we're talking about this and breaking it down and letting people know what a real right is. And hopefully that's going to make people want to really defend it and fight for it, because once we lose them, guys, we're not getting them back. They don't give them back once they take it away. It doesn't happen that way. So uh, that's my thoughts on it, Chris.
Great, good points, Rick. I appreciate what you were saying there. I always like to try to bring things down to some sort of real, practical things that people can think about. One of the words that comes into my head, when we put one word with another word, it kind of changes the meaning of that word, right? When we were when we were in school, they talked about constitutional rights.
Yep.
Or human rights, right? And when you add this other word, human rights or constitutional rights, it gives you this impression that somehow in the past or at some important meeting that someone explained this idea that we should all have these certain rules that we should be able to live by, human rights, and that it wasn't okay for people to be abusing people in this way. Maybe that was torturing people, maybe that was stealing their food. These are things rulers and authorities have done all through history. And so somewhere along the line, people get frustrated and they're like, that's not right. Right? It's a pretty basic thing, is to say, hey, that's not right. But the way we can really break it down even more simple is to think of a lie. When someone tells you a lie, if someone were to tell you it's safe to walk down that road, and then you walk down that road and it turns out that road leads you to a cliff and you almost fall off the cliff, you'd be like, hey, that wasn't right. That person told me it was safe to walk down this road, but it actually led to a cliff. So what they did was clearly wrong, right? And so the reason why people have trouble differentiating between this concept, which is a principle-based concept, it's something that can't be divided or taken apart, or there's no reality where right and wrong don't exist. However, people are getting caught up in what's called relativism. Mm-hmm. And there's different kinds of relativism. There's moral, that's what we talk about a lot when we're talking about natural law, moral relativism. But there's also, like, people have this thing they talk about in the books called cultural relativism. And that's where people think, oh, well, things are different in different places. See, in some other country, people wear their hair long. In another place, that's not okay. You're not allowed to wear shorts in one country. You're supposed to have a long shirt in another. So you have different rights, right? And they'll call that a right. But like, it's never going to be wrong to dress differently or look differently, because the reason is it doesn't harm anybody. And that's really where, like Jerry said, where Passio did such a good job of defining this, of hinging our right based on when you're harming or not. But even that term, harming somebody, can be a little bit, there can be some gray areas. Is it harming someone to yell in their face? Is it harming to someone to spit on them? Or is it only harm when you punch them? And so people can disagree sometimes about how right or how wrong something is. And that's where it gets a little tricky. So does that spark any thoughts or ideas with you, Brandon? I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, to kind of touch up on what you were saying, another thing they've gotten people to believe in is this notion of civil rights, which there is no such thing as civil rights. There are only rights, because when you look at what the word civil means, it comes from the Latin word civilis, which means relating to society. So in actuality, what they are indoctrinating people to subscribe to is that rights come from society. And that is 100% incorrect. Rights don't come from man or any group of man or no society of man. So this whole notion of civil rights is a form in a way to obfuscate what a real right is. And that's why we see all of these people, oh, you have civil rights, or, have someone fought for your civil rights. We're like, no, that is incorrect, because there's no such thing. That is an illusion. There are only rights that are granted because you exist in existence. And as long as you continue to exist in existence, then you will have those same rights. And then to kind of touch upon the second part of what you were saying, which I just kind of had a brain fart here, but a lot of people, and to kind of touch up on what Jim was saying, a lot of people have bought into the whole wrongs being rights, and they can't distinguish between the two, because they're stuck in that form of cognitive dissonance. And it's mind control, which continues to hold these false beliefs up in their minds. So then therefore they haven't really, taken in most of this information. They haven't really heard what a real right is, and they've never really even challenged what they think is true and what they have been indoctrinated to believe. And that's why we continue to see majority of the people, deep throat in the state, asking for, help more state to protect their rights, when in the objective reality, the state is not protecting your rights. It's only trampling over those rights and getting you to believe that they have that authority. And you see, it all comes down to the belief in authority, because when you start talking about civil rights and all of that false indoctrination, at the heart of it, at the core of it, is not only just moral relativism, but the idea of, that someone else has the authority over you. That's why they say, oh, it's civil rights, because civil rights come from the group, or it comes from those who are in charge. It comes from the government. So if you have a problem, you need to vote someone else in. And that's what continues the mind control and the whole slavery.
uh like as I was saying earlier, I try to really talk to people in person. I seem that that's where I like kind of gauge what people are like, where they're at. And it's really shocking. And it does shock me every time, because I've never had anybody be able to give me as I was saying earlier, the definition of what a right is, a correct definition. They always seem to think that it comes from government. And it's really scary when they've done their job, the social engineers and the programming that's gone on, and that they've done to people to make people just automatically think that. And so it was shocking to me, because I kind of like, when you learn about, like I said, listening to Mark and other people, learning about what a right is, it just seems to be really common sense, an action that doesn't cause harm to another sentient being. And I just don't think people have ever thought of it that way, or have heard it put that way. So they've got us believing that our rights do come from a so-called authority, and then you have this belief in authority. So if they're on a whim make a write up, they write it down, and we are supposedly supposed to follow it because their authority. And then it's really disturbing that how bad it's gotten. And it was like I was saying earlier, the last couple of years is what really woke me up to how why we're losing our rights.
That's interesting. You were saying when you write it down, and it's funny because that's the way a lot of people think. When you write something down, that makes it right. What do you think, Jerry? When we write something down, does that make it right?
Well, I'll ask that for the viewers. I mean, if I write down, I'm in charge of I'm taking 10% of your paycheck, Chris. Does that sound okay? I'll leave that to the listener.
That's a good example.
Great
Yeah.
example. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, just to jump in real quick, I know that I said I had that brain fart earlier, but Chris mentioned, like people kind of want to help pick apart this idea of harm, and then they'll start talking about emotional harm. You can't really control someone else's emotions, but what you can control is your own body, your own bodily autonomy. You can control your actions and you can control your behaviors. So when they talk about harm, I like to be more specific and say the initiation of coercive force, because that right there is what violence is. Harm and violence are two different things. Because if a politician is coming at you and they're threatening to steal your money, and you pull out your firearm and you blow them hell away, yes, you may have caused some harm, but you was in the right to do that because they're trying to steal from you. But if someone like a politician is trying to break in your door to steal something from you, and you do the same thing, once again, that's the right, but they are in the wrong because they are the one who are initiating that violence. They are the ones who were taking their hands and actually physically have manifesting wrongdoing by the way of coercive force. So they are initiating coercive force. So when someone says harm, we're not talking about emotional harm. When people start bringing it up, it's like you need to kind of go within yourself and build those internal characteristics to become a better, strong human being. Because anyone can say something and it cause you some form of emotional harm. That's a reflection of you not doing your own internal work. So we're not talking about the internal harm. We're talking about the external harm to someone else. As far as, again, with these hands are so important, because with these hands come responsibility. With these hands come power, because that's what the word means, is to have hands. I mean, you can grasp things, how we can pick up things, how we can pick up a tool and use it for something good. We can use it for something bad. So then it comes down to free will. You have the choice. So then, are you choosing to use these hands to go out and initiate coercive force, which is violence? Or are you using these hands to build and construct a world based in what you really want, as far as freedom, as far as, seeing the generations that come after us, being able to uh enjoy their livelihood? So I think that's a clear point that people seem to forget, because they try to come at this from an emotional standpoint. And that's something that you can't do. You have to kind of put your emotions aside to a degree and understand how the logical aspect. Then once you take in the logical aspect of this information, then you can apply it on the emotional level, because then you start to help point it inward and look at yourself and see, how am I adhering to these rights? How am I adhering to that natural law? And then if there is some form of contradiction, then that's how you fix it. You can't start off with the emotional plane first, because it's not going to work, and you're not going to understand what a right is. And that's why people have such a hard time, because if you come at it from that emotional level first, you're going to revert back to your programming.
Absolutely. I got a good idea where you were talking, a little example I could give, but you got anything you want to jump on in, Jim, before I do?
Yeah, I like your point about writing it down on a piece of paper. I've heard Lark and Rose speak about that a lot. How, like, the government, like, just because they wrote it down on a piece of paper means they're allowed to take your money. Or I think of this case of this movie documentary I'd watched recently called Farmageddon, and the FDA raided this family's house who was selling raw milk. So they believed they had the right, which is actually wrong, to invade this family's house and hold them hostage in their own house. And because it was written down on a piece of paper, right? Like we believe like, and it's another thing, like, did we delegate that right to the that they can do that? Like, I hear, like, Clark and Rose bring that up a lot. Like, how can you give a right to someone that you're not, that you don't have, right? Like, we don't have the right to harm anyone, to raid their house and hold them hostage at gunpoint. So how can you give that right to them? And there was a great interview I had watched recently about this guy, the former senator of Hawaii, and this guy's asking him that question, and it's like Brandon said, totally like that whole cognitive dissonance thing. But yeah, how do you give a right away if you don't have if we're all, if we're all free, how can you give the right to harm? Like if you don't have that right, how can you authorize? And I keep thinking, it's like the government's definition of a right is us giving them the permission to do wrong. So I still get stuck on that. I mean, I get it. I get the whole cognitive dissonance of it, but like I want other people to understand that. Like it seems like they've taken the word and like they've used it as permission to do wrong, but they call it a right. So
Yeah.
that's how I'm still stuck on.
It's great points. And the fact that they can change it at a whim is what's really disturbing to me, is that they just on a whim, they can change it. They write it down and then we're expected to follow it. And they said it's a right. And then we have this belief in authority that we have to follow it. And they can just change our rights, or think they can. And people go along with it, not realizing that they don't even have the right to do what they're doing.
Yeah, I thought of an example to show how silly it is, the way that we've all been indoctrinated. And it's something I picked up recently in my self-defense class. My instructor was telling me when he learned self-defense, you had to bow to your master. You weren't allowed to look him in the eye. And we were talking about the tradition of bowing and how traditionally martial arts, two martial arts experts, their bow might be like this, a slight little head nod, right? But we think back to times of like a king, right? And a king with their dynasty, they're wearing their king crown. When they walk down the street, everybody on the street is expected to bow your head down. And the real reason for that, it's presented as respect and ceremony, right? But the real reason for it is because when your head's bowed to the ground, that you're vulnerable. If someone wanted to, for instance, kill you, it'd be really easy. They could strike you with a sword while your head's down. And it's hard for you to attack somebody or come at some attack to this king or his, all his little crowd of people around him while you're bowed down. Someone's going to see you jump up and move, and they're going to be able to take you out. So back in those days, it was super like right out in front. Like they're basically creating a ceremony and a procedure to where everybody submits their right to defend themselves. And they're used to doing it because that's the way we do it. Whenever the king comes and the guy blows the trumpet and the guy yells, we all submit our right to self-defense, which is inherent in having a body. If something's flying at you, you automatically want to block. If something tries to hit your head, you put your hands up and you move your head. That's totally natural, 100% natural born right. What would convince people to give that right up and to just bow their head down when somebody's walking by with a sword? That's the last thing you want to do, is give them an easy shot at your neck. And so, that's like old fashioned stuff with kings, right? But really, things haven't changed a bit. It's just a lot more manipulative, but it's the same exact thing. Now, instead of carrying the sword, they're carrying the pen or the digital pen.
Exactly.
Right. And it's everybody doing the ceremony of submitting their natural born right to defend themselves in order to let the king go by with his crown. And now that's a president or a politician or a police officer or somebody who claims to have the crown of authority. So, why do people keep believing that? Because they're afraid. And I think that's the thing I would like to ask you guys next, because I think it's really about a fear. And anybody who disagreed with what we were saying, they'd be like, well, how the hell are you going to keep things in line? If we didn't have rules and we didn't have constitutional rights, then we would all get walked all over and evil people would just do whatever they wanted to us and we wouldn't have any cops to defend us. So how do you deal with that devil's advocate argument?
Well, first off, I try not to throw up, because when I hear that, it literally just makes me want to throw up, because I'm like, don't we have that hell now? I mean, like, hell, don't we already have psychopaths who are already trying to rule us, who are trying to murder us, who are trying to enslave us, who are trying to throw us in prison, who are stealing from us, who are enslaving our kids who and are controlling all aspects of our life. So it's like hell when I hear that and I start to point out these universal truths to them, then you can kind of see those wheels start to spin in their own mind because they've never really thought about it. And the reason why I say this is you can take 1,000 people and tell them everything that we are saying now, and I guarantee you all of them are going to regurgitate that same negative programming in that response. So that's how you know it's not really them that's saying that. That response has been implanted by the social engineers, by the ones who are in charge, the one who are in authority. Because how can you have so many individuals who regurgitate that same have response? And I've heard it over and over and over, hell again. So my question toward them is, hey, can people learn to work together to get things done? And of course the answer is always like yes. So then why do we need someone else here, hell, with a whip beating us over, hell, our backs and telling us what to do? You just said that, how people can, come together, work and harmonize to get things done. Do we need someone in control in order, how to do that? Do we need someone telling us to build the roads, sitting there with a gun, telling us, hey, you need to pave that cement? No, we don't. It comes down to our cooperation, our willingness to work with other people. How open are we, to, to build a team, to work together, to learn, to communicate. Those are all skills that people seem to have forgotten because there was a point in time when human beings did get shit done and we didn't really have these authorities there telling us what to do. And it was more empowering. It gave you more of a sense of purpose. It gave you more of a sense of self. It gave you a better sense of belonging. But now, because there's that slave master that's always, cracking the whip, putting people in fear, people can't really see it because they're just stuck in fear. So they can't get the logical processes going. They can't use that discernment. And one last thing that Jam had said is he said that the government claims to get the rights from the people. In actuality, what that does is it creates an infinite loop of slavery because the people will always be there. So the government will always be there as long as it claims to get the rights from people. So it's like that slavery wheel that will just continue, that wheel of samsara, that wheel of suffering. And that's how, hell, it gets away with all of its crimes, hell, against humanity, because it's saying, well, hell, y'all voted for us. Y'all are letting us do it. Hell, y'all haven't done anything. It's like the whole psychopath, if you don't say no, then you're silently saying yes. And that's what, have people have really done is because they haven't stood up to take out this, how this bully, then how the governments are, the ones in charge, like, well, how y'all aren't doing anything, how y'all aren't saying anything, how y'all aren't standing up. So, hell, that gives us that right. Because that's how the psychopath mindset works.
And can I just add on to something that you're saying, Brandon? The evil part of what you're, and building on what you're saying, is that the governments have convinced the people that they may have to take and squash some of your rights and strip you of them to keep you safe. And I think that is just such an evil thing that they've convinced people, because I've had people say that, like, well, and especially with here in Canada and the gun thing and stuff I was mentioning earlier, and a lot of people are saying, well, I understand that they're taking some of your rights away, but they're doing it in this lie of safety, in this mask of keeping you safe. And so it kind of makes people go, okay, well, I'll give it up to feel safe. And so I just wanted to add that in to build on what you're saying, that a lot of people, I think, just believe they have to give up some of their rights, because they need that feeling of safety. And that's what they've sold this lie to the people, which I think is truly evil it just is.
Yeah, imagine if you someone just claimed your right hand or your left hand and said, oh, I'm going to just take control of your left hand now.
Yep.
And they tried to manipulate your left hand whenever they wanted. That is basically the same exact thing as someone manipulating your energy, which is also your time and your money.
Yep.
So, we've talked a little bit about what is a right, what a right is not. We've talked a little bit about some of the arguments and the fear and how that creates this back and forth disagreement about something that should be really straightforward, and how people are indoctrinated into seeing things in a really backwards way. So my question next is, how do we change this dynamic in the world? I'm personally feel fairly certain that if a large percentage of the population, the majority, understood this concept we're talking about, we would have a safer world with less need for fear, less of that need. Yet right now we're living in a world that has so much fear because everything's crazy, because people can just take hold of your left hand or make you submit at the end of their sword if they have the right words on the right paper or they're wearing the right costume. So how would things change for the better? How would we help bridge that gap for people? Is my next question. What's the next step forward for those of us that have come to realize this truth, this inherent truth?
Well,
I
one of
think-
the
okay.
sorry, Jim, you can go.
I was going to say, just what we're doing now, I think is very important. Just talk about it, like it seems like I'm sitting here in amazement, like how we're talking about the word right and rights and how people don't think about it. And, but just really just talking about it, bringing awareness to like really critically think about what a right is. Like Rick kept saying, he's so amazed how people don't know what it is. And I'm like, yeah, I really am amazed by that too. Because people think they're free with, the whole programming and everything. But it seems so simple. Just to, like, people would be like, wouldn't even think about talking about rights. But it's now that we're talking about it and bringing up all this, cognitive dissonance around it, it's just talking about it, getting people to think about it, that's
Yeah,
that
like
seems
like Jerry said, throw out an example. If I write on a piece of paper, it's fine for you to cut off people's fingers if you don't like them. Well, does that make it right to cut off people's fingers because I wrote it down? Obviously not. Does it make it right just because somebody with a really big hat said it? I mean,
Yep.
we could go through a billion
voting for them?
examples, right?
Yeah.
At what point does something become right? So yeah, you got anything you wanted to say, Jerry?
Yeah, like what if, let's say, a parent tells you, hey, you're not allowed to marry this person? Is it because you're looking at this person as an authority figure? Does that mean it's the right thing, like correct? I would say no. Like, although this is my parent giving me a command, I still have the choice to marry who I want. I mean, we all make decisions, and I choose to live right. So, yeah. Pass it to you, Chris.
Yeah, I think where it gets confusing right there is some people might be like, oh, well, something that's right for me might not be right for you, and that's kind of where the confusing thing comes in. Like, and there is some truth to that, like how, we're all different. We all have different needs and wants, and every situation's a little different. Anything that we could think of and say, oh, that's a harmful behavior, like I said, there's like some gray areas where it's not always so simple who was right and who was wrong in every situation. Sometimes we'd have to really get down and get the people involved in the situation and get all the facts before we could really find out if what happened was right or wrong. But ultimately, who decides? That's where it gets tricky. Who ultimately decides what's right or wrong? I think that's where people get lost, because it seems like a big responsibility. It's kind of scary, like, especially if you're thinking about, how do I make decisions on what's right or wrong for large groups of people, which is kind of a silly idea to begin with, but that's what people think is normal. So what's wrong with that thinking?
You want me to ask you a question or?
Sure. Yeah, I'm kind of playing the devil's advocate just a little bit because I'm thinking about what people would say and what people I've talked to say.
Well, the first thing I would say is, are you responsible for them? Because you are not. That individual is responsible for uh, their own actions and their own behaviors. And the same thing that goes along with, well, something may be right for me and may be wrong, how for you, or something may be right for you and wrong for me. We're not talking about subjective taste. We're not talking about subjective forms of interpretation, you know, like favorite color, or, you may have a bad reaction towards something. And like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about actions and behaviors with you and another being. So I think if you just came from that means and that principle, that understanding, it'll get all of the subjective interpretation as far as, something may be right for you, like how all that would be thrown out of the door. We have to understand we're talking about actions and behaviors with yourself and someone else. And how, like, if you boil it down to just two people, you and someone else, then that will bring more clarity, because then you have to get rid of all of the other forms of programming. Just two individuals. Does one individual have a right to steal from someone else? Does that other individual have a right to steal from the other, help from the other individual? Then that will bring more clarity. And to talk about bridging the gap, I know I'm going to say something that people really don't like hearing, man, is we have to, in order to bridge that gap, we have to bridge that gap with ourselves first. Because you're talking about going and talking to people who are ignorant, who are in a collective mindset, and who don't care. You need to have that internal armor. You need to have that courage. You need to have that willpower, because it is going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. So you need to go within yourself to make sure that you yourself are not just talking about it, that you are actually, practicing what you preach and actually adhering to that, and make sure that you are not in a form of internal contradictory. So then as you start to talk with other people, people will see that in you and they'll resonate with your energy. And therefore it's not like, oh, well, you're just blowing hot smoke up my ass. Because so many people may understand this, but they're still not talking about it, or, trying to bridge that gap with other people, because they haven't really gone within themselves to really feel more comfortable within their own being and to speak this message out there. So one of the biggest things that we can do to bridge this gap is by first bridging that internal gap with our own being, with our own self. Then, therefore, once we start to build these tools, that armor, then as far as bridging that external gap will be much easier, because it is going to be a task. It's not just going to happen overnight. You may get into some arguments, hell, you may get some people who may dislike you. You may lose friends, you may lose family members. It's going to take a lot of willpower. It's going to take a lot of courage. It's going to take a lot of sacrifice. It's going to take a lot of dedication. And you have to have that rigorous energy to keep coming back and coming back and coming back, and also have that compassion, to forgive others, because there may be some people that, that are a little bit more hard-headed. So it may take them a little bit more time. You still have to be willing to be compassionate with them, to still offer that hand in gratitude. So yeah, bridging that gap, you have to bridge that internal gap first, because a lot of people think that they're just going to go out there and start talking to people about natural law and about rights. Well, and when you've done that for a few months or a year, you see how burnt out you're going to feel. And are you just going to, quit? Hell, are you just going to stop?
Yeah, it's sure not easy. What do you got, Rick? You want to say something on that?
I totally agree with what Brandon's saying. It does get exhausting at times. And I remember I take some of your advice, Chris, because I've heard you say you try to break it down, to a simple level, because I kind of went, when I started talking to people, I kind of like just went right at them, and I kind of like just wanted to hit them with so much information at once. And I learned very quickly that's a great way to get somebody to ignore you and shut you right down. So, and I remember you saying like you try to like kind of relate something with them and kind of break it down that way. So I do that a lot when I talk about rights. Like, do I have the right to take half of your paycheck? Can I just come and take half your paycheck when you get paid? Do I have the right to go up and just, punch you in the face or shoot you or whatever? Do I have the right to just take something of yours? And, if people are being honest, they're like, no, you don't have the right to do that. And I kind of relate, well, that's what the governments are doing. And that's what these people in supposed authority are doing. And when I kind of break it down on a simple level, that's where the conversations kind of, I find I get a little bit of traction because they can relate to it. And they're like, oh, that's right. Like, I mean, why do they say I have to give them half of my money or a bit of my, why, and it's a great way to start a conversation. So I think that it's a really great when you bring it down to a simple level and kind of work with someone and just kind of go right at them.
Great. Jim, I pass it to you next.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely fall into that category of someone I still have to do more learning and that inner work. And when I first came across this, it was like I wanted to like let people know and get the word. And I found, I started to alienate people pretty quickly, and I still am, but I feel like this is so important that it's just going to be like with me for the rest of my life. Like, it's like, what, like it's if a slave didn't know they were a slave and then they found out that they were a slave, they want to tell all the other slaves, and they'd be like, no, just be a good slave, like just be good and all that and go along with the way things are. But how could you not, once you know? Like, I don't see how I could ever stop.
I think it was Frederick Douglass was a guy who was writing about during the time of slavery, trying to inform other slaves that the situation was wrong, and
Right.
he had a lot of pushback of people saying, no, like you're saying, just do what you're told. We're the lower species. Basically, they were so indoctrinated into believing that even someone was telling them you're a slave, you don't want to be a slave, they're like, no, that's the way things are, don't rock the boat. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Were you done?
No, that's cool. That's just it. Yeah, it's just there's a lot of people don't want to hear it, I guess. I'm finding that, but yeah, I'll pass it to Jerry.
Thanks, Jim. I think what you said was fantastic, and this is a great way to practice just what I know a right is. Like, Jim, you said you have to still work, like you're still a work in progress. I think that as long as we kind of comprehend as long as we know what a right is, it's very basic. I'm able to communicate it to you. So I am glad to do so, and I suggest whoever's watching this to do the same, because I'm thinking a lot of people don't know what a right is, and that's why we're doing this. So it's very basic, but also it's there's a lot to it. So I can pass it to Chris.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, we have to get past this like kindergarten level on this thing, because the truth is the world we live in doesn't accept what is true or what is reality. For instance, let me give an example. If I'm driving down the road and the police have a blockade set up and they tell me you can't come through here, you don't have a right to come through here, and I say absolutely I do. Well, they have a lot more power than I do. They have a lot more weapons. They have better communications within network of their gang and their evildoers, and they literally can stop me. They literally can pull me out of my car and do what they want to me, right up to the point where I don't let them. And so, in the physical world, most of us aren't prepared to actually protect our rights or those around us. And many of us don't have the facilities. But I do think it's important to start working in that direction. It starts with the fundamental principles of understanding what is right and what is wrong. And then from there, we start to build our responsibility. Our ability to be able to respond to situations has to be a lot more than it is now. Because the way things are right now, so many people are convinced of a whole false paradigm that they're going to back that up in mass. And when you have hundreds of people, or even 20 or even 10, telling you you can't do something, well, it's pretty damn hard to do it. They can stop you. And so from their point of view, this false world of calling wrongs rights is real, because they see it being enacted in that way in the real world. And so we're trying to convince people of an idea, a philosophy, a fundamental principle, so they can understand how to better treat each other in the world. But it's a long way from where we're at to
Right.
what we're describing, because there's so many things that are backwards and twisted and crooked. So the only way we could start in ourselves. And so I would say, personally, on a real day-to-day basis, I think it's important to learn how to defend yourself. I think it's important to learn about weapons. It's important to learn a little bit about the law that exists now and how to defend yourself in different situations. That being said, I don't think that's an effective way to change things. I don't think, just because, for instance, if I get pulled over by a police officer, I'm not going to fully be able to defend my rights in this world I live in, unless I want to completely giving up a truth speaker and someone who teaches natural law. I'm not 100% ready to, in the physical world, deal with this yet. To an extent, some people are at different levels on that, but it's tricky. And that's why it's tricky. And that's why it's hard for people to understand the difference, because we live in a world that's totally backwards and everybody is protecting that backwards point of view. So I agree what Jerry says. The most effective thing is to start on this kindergarten level and start trying to bring this conversation forward, trying to ask people these questions. And hopefully we get enough people to start to realize how backwards the world we're living in is, and to awaken to the reality, which is that you can't control other people, and your limits to what you can do, like Brandon said, end right at this, your skin. Basically, anything beyond that is outside of the realm of your right. And if you think you can make decisions for other people or other groups of people, it's not going to work out well over time. So that's kind of where I'll end it. And I'll pass it to Brandon, and then maybe everyone wants to say some kind of closing statements about what we do going forward.
Yes, what we do going forward is what we should have been doing from day one, is, educating ourselves with the proper tools, this occult knowledge of natural law, help, understanding what real freedom is, and then to, going within ourselves to hold ourselves held accountable to those standards and to those principles, because you can't hold someone else held accountable if you yourself aren't holding your own self held accountable. So we cannot be hypocrites in this. And then too, if all those fails, I hope you got your firearms and body armor, because if we can't get this done in consciousness and speech and right moral action, then sadly, there may come a time when the firearms may have to come out. And I think a lot of people, kind of run away from that. And I'm not one of them. I'll pass it on to Rick.
Well said, Brandon. And I would just add on what you're saying, that you seek the information out and start looking at what we're talking about, what what a right is. And I really think that for me, it was Mark Passio's work. I know for a lot of you guys and maybe people listening that for me, watching his natural law seminars and listening to his podcast really helped and started to answer a lot of the questions. So I would definitely recommend somebody um, start there if they want to. And I would also say that it's very important that you start doing the work on yourself, as we were talking about. I think that's so important to have a strong foundation in yourself as you're going forward. You need that foundation, and then along the way, start asking yourself the question: are you doing an action in your life that's causing harm to another person? And I just want to leave it with that, because I think that's an important question. And I can pass it on to Jim if you like.
Sure, thanks, Rick. Yeah, I am doing something in my life that's causing harm to other people, because I'm allowing the government to take money from me and use it for the military and harm innocent people. So yeah, that eats away at me. And so I'm very grateful to be included in this conversation. Thank you, guys. It's good to think
Thank you.
about this stuff. And anybody's listening, I'd like them to ask themselves, do you have the right? Can you give away the right to do something that you can't, which is actually a wrong? Can you give someone the right to do something that you cannot do? Like, take your money and use it for war. And I'll leave it at that. Like, just think about it. Think about what rights really are.
Jerry, you got any last thoughts?
Yeah, I don't want you, the listener, to be overwhelmed with all this knowledge, this greatness that everyone here spoke. So I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for everyone here for bringing me in as well. Super grateful. And yes, I hope that you got something out of this. So hopefully you ask questions and don't conform.
Right on. Yeah, it's not time to submit, especially in these times. So yeah, I want to thank you all for coming and having this conversation with me. Great roundtable discussion. Truly all warriors of truth and people working on the one great work, which is working towards the freedom of all people. And that's not going to happen if we don't make an effort and use the power of our words. And that is the best weapon that is in existence, is the power of our word. And that is how we protect our rights and the rights of innocent people. So thanks much, guys. We'll close it up and we'll be back for more on another awesome topic pretty soon. Thanks for listening.